The summer rains were so heavy that grain could not ripen. It could hardly be gathered and used to bake bread down to the Nativity of the Blessed Mother, unless it was first put in vessels to dry. Around the end of autumn the dearth was mitigated in part. Toward Christmas it became as bad as before. Bread did not have its usual nourishing power and strength because the grain was not nourished by the warmth of the summer sunshine. Hence those who ate it, even in large quantities, were hungry again after a little while. There can be no doubt that the poor wasted away, when even the rich were constantly hungry. 4 pennies worth of coarse bread was not enough to feed a common man for one day. The usual kinds of meat suitable for eating were too scarce. Horse meat was precious, plump dogs were stolen, and according to many reports, men and women in many places secretly ate their own children. From Johannes de Trecolo, Annales.
In the years 1314 and 1315, great rains swelled over northern Europe. Whatever season or place or time, one could see the same weather causing the same effects. Many thought that the great flood of Noah's time had returned. Everyone experienced similar outcomes: seedbeds sodden, crops and pastures underwater, grain rotting, fish traps wrecked, dikes washed away, meadows too wet to be mown, turf too soggy to be cut, and quarries too swollen with the overflow to be worked for stone or lime.
There was such an inundation of waters, one German wrote, that it seemed as though it was the flood.
The following 7 years found the worst of hungers afflict northern Europe. The year 1315 gave a far smaller harvest than usual, depleting many families' food reserves. People gathered what food they could from the forests: edible roots, plants, grasses, nuts, and bark. Many fell weak, though only few died. Spring and summer of 1316 gave more cold and wet times again, however. Families tilled the land with less energy, and could scrounge much less food to make up for last year's shortage.
What they fell in was a disaster unheard of among living men.
The 14th century saw its first years marred by turmoil. England and Scotland fought for conquest and freedom. The Holy Roman Empire remained crownless, with kings engaged in petty dispute. King Philip IV of France ordered the Knights Templars dissolution by fire at the stake. His Holiness the Pope was helpless puppet. Discontentment at affairs grew among the populace, resistance and rebellion forming in large pockets. Even when men fought, however, the land kept fertile. Crops grew, harvests blossomed, roots bore, until they stopped their usual course. These bounties would fall to calamity wrought by rain and war. Agricultural regimes, marked by large arts, unwalled villages, and towns given to open field farming, dominated northern Europe all the way from central England to the northern arch of France, sweeping from the Vendée to the Rhine, passing over the North German plain through the Baltics, ending by the mass of the Ural Mountains crossing across the Rus and Tatar holdings. These lands supported millions of people, northern Europe flourishing in production and trade, while the Mediterranean peoples preferred a vegetarian diet with soft wheat, stimulated by horticulture subsisting from Roman times. Northern barbarians grew with meat and grains. Coarse cereals and husked wheats, spelt, millet, and barley, was food for animals in the poor, warmer regions. These foods could feed families by their resistance to cold in the north. Since the land was hard, the people adapted. 3-crop rotation allowed farmers to obtain crops more than once a year. Sometimes the land kept fallow, for irrigation alone could not keep the land moist. Damp climate and heavy soil, however, allowed alternate sowing in winter and spring. Farmers kept the cycle in 3 years as manuals recommended. First year, winter wheat. Second year, spring grains and legumes. Third year, fallow. These measures provided insurance against possible failure in crops. Northern Europe had bigger pastures than the Mediterranean, but its reliance on meat and dairy allowed no recourse to greens, fruits, or olives for sustenance. Classical husbandry methods persisted into medieval times. Roman manuals persisted through monastery copies, eventually sold to farmers and husbandmen. However, while classical methods focused on using all available labor to extract as many vegetable calories from the soil, medievals strove to save effort in labor and husbandry, where the agricultural labor pool had started diminishing in the 11th century. Water mills replaced slave-driven grinders and spread throughout Europe. Crowding populations also led to the windmill's invention, for while rivers could be dammed and routed, no one owned the wind. While the light plow remained popular across the former Roman Empire, the wheeled heavy plow was invented to cut deep furrows into the thick, rich soil of northern Europe. Favored draught animals shifted to horses and mules in France and England, while other places kept to oxen. All these innovations in agriculture, which led to surplus, alongside industrial and commercial developments and increased order under the Peace and Truce of God movement, led to the commercial revolution of the Middle Ages. While wars, rebellions, piracy, tariffs, and the following trade interruptions can worsen the famine, these factors alone fail to induce one in pre-modern times. Indeed, natural causes are a greater culprit. The winter of 1310 was the worst recorded in 150 years. Trees that grew in this time show abnormally high ring growth, also pointing to heavy rains. Chronicles, annals, journals, and diaries all the way from Nuremberg to the Netherlands. Poems and rhymes, scribbles and notes all talk of unusually cold weather. By 1315 and 1316, the downpours occurred all year, winter, spring, summer, and fall. While 1317 had a brief recourse, the following winter into 1318 was the worst ever recorded in medieval times. The second worst was that of 1321-1322, just before the downpours finally ended. Compounding the hardship caused by rain was war. When the Holy Roman Prince-Electors could not decide who would be emperor, war broke out between Duke Frederick the Fair of Austria and Duke Ludwig IV of Upper Bavaria. An observer in the Frankfurt area recorded Frederick's army suffering casualties from food shortages. "A great multitude of men and horses," he writes. "And what a wonder! Some knights who were sitting on a magnificently outfitted horse gave the horse and their weapons away for cheap wine. And they did this because they were so terribly hungry." This interregnum ended only in 1326, when Ludwig and Frederick reconciled, and the former was crowned emperor. In the time between, however, famine and war convulsed the empire. In Flanders, the French king attempted to force his suzerainty over local Flemings, who had been autonomous for centuries. King Louis X wanted another puppet in his growing list of possessions, started by his father. The rains of 1315 turned roads into quagmires, dirt paths into muddy swamps. Supply wagons failed to reach the French, who were forced to retreat, lest the Flemings repeat their victory in the Battle of the Golden Spurs 13 years ago. The war had cost serfs across the kingdom their property in exchange for freedom. Louis X himself would die the next year, and Philip V was forced to compromise in Flanders in 1320. He attempted to cut supply of food to Flanders during the famine, only for smuggling to flourish instead. Count Louis I of Flanders would marry Philip's daughter Margaret for peace. Count himself faced a rebellion after the famine, for he had raised taxes and installed pro-French policies. More wars occurred during the famine. War between England and Scotland, where Robert the Bruce continued William Wallace's campaign, struggles between Norway, Denmark, and Sweden, yet these lie beyond our scope. And so the famine made its effects known to all living men. Crop rotation became useless, for endless rain leached nitrates from soil. Winter wheat harvests failed, and caused much hunger amid cold. Vineyards and wineries produced so little wine, Records kept in the town of Neustadt an der Hart, famous wine producer in the Palatinate Electorate of the Holy Roman Empire, saw villagemen complain of deep snows, deserted villages, abandoned fields, and in 1316, a trifling quantity of wine. The next year saw very little wine from the town. Abundant vintages would not resume until 1325, but in quality worse than bad. It took another 3 years before exceptionally good wine was produced again. Otherwise, draconian taxation continued as leaders continued fighting wars. From this disaster, the price of coarse cereals and husked wheats rose dramatically. Judicial court rules from the Downham Manor accounted for farmers' inability to use wagons and carriages for 3 weeks in summer because of the mud caused by rain. Other than crops, animal murrains, infectious diseases affecting hoofed animals spread across northern Europe in the deluge's aftermath. The traditional diet of meat and grains could no longer be sustained. Rinderpest was responsible for the deaths of many oxen and horses when the famine began. Pigs were initially spared. However, anthrax would also spread and cause many pig deaths. Persistent dampness and uncured hay allowed these diseases to spread. The dearth of grains for feed also contributed to animal deaths. Sheep and cattle lay dead on fields, rotting as the downpours continued. Animal losses themselves contributed to further crop failures, for animal manure was an important part of fertilizer. One abbey in Derbyshire, England, records cattle herds dropping from 48 to 6, 45 to 2, and so on. Welsh and Irish journals also point to anthrax and rinderpest spreading like wildfire among animals. The last great impact of this disaster was the end of accountancy and yield estimation among English homesteads, farmsteads, and manors. Doing so was arrogant and haughty, in a time when so many were struggling only to not starve. In the Black Death, men died for a few months. In the Great Famine, the agony was slow. This disaster led to social and demographic changes across all of Europe afterwards. Never had prices been so high or volatile, never had wages been so low, and never had so many people experienced bankruptcy. Only few benefited from the high prices, with many losing or abandoning homesteads, selling houses, going into debt. Famines themselves became less frequent and less widespread after, although they remained a reminder of civil society's fragility. Parts of Poland and Russia would specialize in grain to cater to Western Europe. The desolation and hardship in this time was symbolized for many by a comet, which lit the night sky in 1315 and 1316. It appeared as a blood-red cross appeared over England, while Swedes observed scarlet light looked like showers of blood. Even the Chinese annals recorded this comet, recorded from 28 November 1315, 12 March 1316. To discuss the famine's full effect on society would take more parts. Discussing socioeconomic and demographic conditions in Europe at that time, we end this first part with a verse from the Revelation to St. John. And when he broke the third seal, I heard the third figure say, "Come and look." So I looked, and saw there a black horse, whose rider carried in his hand a pair of scales. I thought too, I heard a voice that came from where the living figures were. A silver piece, it said, for a quart of wheat, a silver piece for 3 quarts of barley, do the wine, and the oil no hurt. Revelation 6:5-6. These are famine prices, at which a laborer would have to spend the whole of his day's wages to provide bread for himself alone.